Hello, my name is Michele, and you're listening to Profit is a Choice. Robyn Thomas is joining us today on the podcast. Robyn has an architecture degree from Auburn, and she has merged that education with her love of design to provide a one-stop architecture offer specializing in design completion and optimization. She calls it the Master of Done. I love that so much. Today, we're going to delve into feasibility, what it is, why it's needed, when is the right time for the conversation around it. Enjoy the podcast. Every day, empowered entrepreneurs are taking ownership of their company financial health and enjoying the rewards of reduced stress and more creativity. With my background as a financial software developer, owner of multiple businesses in the interior design industry, educator, and speaker, I coach women in the interior design industry to increase their profits, regain ownership of their bottom line, and to have fun again in their business. Welcome to Profit is a Choice. Hey, Robyn, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Michele. Thank you so much for having me.
I am excited, and I understand from just a minute ago that this is your first podcast.
It is.
Awesome. Well, I have no doubt that it's going to be an amazing conversation and that you're going to do just great. We actually, I'm going to say we are Instagram friends, and we Instagram met. You mentioned one of the podcasts that you had heard, and just we're super thankful for how this podcast has impacted you. And so that meant a lot to me. It's always great to hear when people are really listening. You know, we get so busy. I don't even think to tell podcast producers that are out there working and hustling, I don't even think to tell them sometimes, or to go give them a rating. I don't even think about it. And
Yes.
You reminded me how important it is when sometimes we do this work. And yeah, we hear things. But anyway, I appreciate you reaching out. And so now we're going to get to have a really fun conversation.
Certainly. And you inviting me on, Michele, is just a testament to your generosity. I did not anticipate that happening. I really just wanted you to know my personal appreciation for your platform and your mission in terms of empowering the design community to be strategic and reap the benefits in their businesses.
Oh, I love that so much. You're right. You didn't come into it with anything other than gratitude. And I saw that and I was like, oh, there's the story. I want to know more. So I think it's funny. Curiosity has been a big part of my last couple of years, really trying to be, I've always been a curious child. My mother said I used to open all the drawers at my grandmother's house.
Yeah.
But just having that curiosity of what's happening and how do other people use information and what do their businesses look like? I mean, I think that's how we learn, right? And
Yes.
so I'm appreciative that you're allowing us to be curious about what you do today.
Certainly.
So tell our listeners, Robyn, where you started. Like, what is your degree in? How did you get started in this industry? And then move us forward to kind of what your business looks like today.
Well, Michele, I know many of your listeners, and you perhaps too, can relate to the fuzziness of the journey when you're a young person. You're just a kid. You're not thinking about how you're going to support yourself when you start adulting, so to speak. I was that way, and what I remember though is that I still was the kind of child that, like you said was I was curious, and I could appreciate the various roles that my family and friends who were older than me or even adults in my life would play. I was curious about what they do when they went to work. What does going to work really mean? And as I got older and older, now I'm in middle school, now I'm going toward high school, that's when you get a lot of dialogue going about, what are you going to do next? And by that time in my life, I had identified a love of buildings. Going on family vacations, my pictures were not of a lot of people, they were of buildings. And my fascination just grew the more I found out about them. However, there weren't a lot of people in my life that looked like me, woman, Black, in the industries that I was interested in, primarily architecture. So temporarily, I made a little detour in my college enrollment to do engineering. But upon going to campus, getting ready to go, I was with my mother. We went to visit the School of Architecture, and they had an exhibit of all of these 3D models that the students had done in preparation for being evaluated. And I made a decision. in my heart and mind that no, I'm going to go ahead and pursue becoming an architect. So fast forward to being in school, it wasn't all that I thought it would be. There were various challenging things about it when we would be likewise evaluated, just like those models I saw. I learned that I had more of a thirst for the business side of design. And I didn't see that being fulfilled in the way the education portion was handled. But I persevered, graduated, got a job at a firm, and then pivoted yet again in my thinking that I'm still fascinated with this idea of the business of things. So lo and behold, got into real estate investing, had enough income coming in to where when the recession of about '07 and '08 happened, I was able to support myself when I was laid off. And really, by that time, I had started purchasing real estate, um, uh, not with the intention that it would be my thing, but more so as leverage. And it just kind of came together. I have been an entrepreneur full time, I believe now over 15 years. And even in that journey, I have not always focused on what I do now in terms of architecture and interior design. That focus really came about recently in about 2016. And since then, I've focused on residential design and a little bit of commercial design.
So I'm curious, how did you, I mean, I love the entrepreneurship. That's kind of the way that my things happened, right? I didn't even realize that I'd been an entrepreneur from the time that I was charging the high school girls to come to my house so I could French braid their hair to go out. Like, that's pretty
Right.
entrepreneurial when my mom and dad
It
just let
is.
these teenage girls come to my house for me to French braid their hair. Like I look back at that now and I'm like, that is so wild and so crazy.
Yes.
But we all have this like this spirit of curiosity about something. So I love how yours has moved you through. Mine has moved me through. I thought I wanted to be a teacher. And then full
Wow.
transparency, my mother was a teacher and I saw how much money they made for how much work they did and how much they had to put up with. And I thought, I'm not doing that. And then my dad was in computer software and I'm like, that seems a little bit more my track because it's the math and the science. I did
Mhm.
that for a while and then mine morphed and changed to workroom and, owning a school and doing all the things to now coaching around all of it, but having a software company where I pull it back and then I teach and educate at the same time. So it's just funny how those threads weave in and out of our lives, right? So that we can follow it.
Yes.
I'm curious though, in the morphing that you did in 2016, where you've created an interior design firm that merges the interior design with the architecture. What was it that drew you into the interior design part? You had the architecture on lockdown. You'd already worked for a company with that, right? How did you get into the interiors piece as a focus?
Yes, yes, Michelle. Well, it's where we live. Yes, the house as a whole is the embodiment of the dwelling space. Like that's without the house, there is no interior, so to speak. But when we get out of our cars or when we walk, if you're a city dweller, into our home, it's the interiors that really shape our sense of living.
Mm-hmm.
And also, there's this immediate gratification you get with interiors, relatively immediate. To construct a house takes a lot longer than filling out a house, really, giving the rooms their atmosphere and mood and function. Over time, purchasing homes of my own, renting homes of my own, that's where I began to connect the dots that when I sat down to do a task and design, it was all appealing to different parts of my brain, but there was something about the interiors that just lit up my creativity. And so I said, if I feel this way, I see the transformative power of interiors. I certainly want to offer this experience to others, to my clients.
Let me back up. I think mentally we know that a space and interiors can transform a life, but I think sometimes emotionally, when we really connect with it, that's when it makes the difference. Like it's so funny. We recently, well, last year, we spent renovating our kitchen. And it was a long renovation process, not from the actual work, but from the start of the planning till it was getting done. Because we did all of our planning, I'll say March, April, May. And then we put everything on hold because we had a wedding and we went to
Ah,
Alaska. So then we were on hold for June, July, and the middle of August. So those months, just everything had been ordered, the cabinets were in production, everything was happening, and everything went on hold. And then they started in August, at the end of August, and it went through October. Because we had the whole kitchen put back together, we redid all of our floors, like there was a lot going on.
mm.
But what was so interesting in that is now everybody that walks into my house, when they go look at my kitchen, here's what they say. Wow, this looks just like you.
Hmm.
And I'm like, I don't know what that means. Is that good? Is that bad? And not that I'm fishing for a compliment, I'm trying to understand what they're really saying. And then
Yes.
they'll say, it's beautiful, but it looks like you. And so finally I said, I need to know what looks like me is. I don't, right? We just live in a space. And when you walk into a space, you're like, oh yeah, I would totally have thought that Robyn lived in a house that looked like that, or it matches your
Mm.
personality, or it fits you. And so I
Mhm.
started asking them, what do you mean? And they said, multiple people, well, it's light, it's bright, it's cheery, it has lots of color. It's just like we see
Mm.
you. And I was like, that's very interesting. And so I never realized that I had a look, so that when people saw a room, they thought that room looks like it fits Michele.
Mm.
That's been a new experience for me. And so I kind of am hearing, just the lens of having just lived through that, and then hearing what you're saying. It's really almost like part of what you do, and as interior design, is you are pulling out the person that you're with,
Mhm.
aspects of them, to put it into the room so that it does feel like them. It does represent them. It does look like them, and I think that's what makes interior design intellectual, but emotional. And in some ways, almost like a I hesitate to say spiritual, but almost like a place where you feel safe and warm,
Mhm. A
and
haven.
a
Mhm.
haven. It really is. You mentioned the power in that. There's just so much power. And I think the goal, you tell me what you think, but I think the goal is to make the space look like the most elevated version of the homeowner, not like just the best work of Robyn, or just the best work of the designer, right? It's really to make them feel like it's their space, because you're going to walk out the door.
Yes. And one key principle that I employ is layering.
Mm,
There's this idea that when we look at a space that has that power, what happened with you and your friends and family making the observation? What is not readily apparent is that it starts from the walls and the floor and the ceiling in. It's even the way that it's completed. It starts with, okay, we've got drywall and floor and ceiling. Then we put a finish. That's layer one. Then we come in with fixtures. That's another layer. Then we come in with the lighting. That's another layer. As we're doing those layers, the choices are dictated by or interwoven with just what you said, the you-ness of the person. Like, what
yes.
is it that is making this home for you? That is weaved into every layer that makes the space.
Oh, so true. So true. Our son and his wife are redoing their kitchen, and we went over last night to see their selections, their choices, their layering in. And it's nice because you start to see their personality, right, in their choices and what they might do. One of the other areas, Robyn, that you and I chatted about, like pre-recording, that there's a word that you use a lot that infuses, I think, a lot of what you do. I don't even know if you recognized how much that word um, represents what you do. You may have, but the word was feasibility. And we mentioned that, I mean, the questions that we were going to talk about, every single one of them came up to some version of feasibility. So before we move into that conversation, I would love for you to define what feasibility means for you, and maybe how you just generally think about it in your business, and then we'll get more granular.
Sure. I guess feasibility has become a foundational element of conversations that I start with people because it's a often missed step, surprisingly so. We sometimes get so enamored with the result that we don't look at the result and then backpedal our way through it to get to the beginning. And a
Mhm.
big part of that beginning is we want to make sure that we have the capacity internally with the way our lives are to handle whatever the scale of the project is, because project work can be disruptive. We want to make sure that we have the investment ready to do it. Who
Amen.
wants to start? Because oftentimes, people have approached me at various stages. I've had several projects where they unfortunately had gotten in over their heads, so to speak. And I could easily see feasibility was not addressed to the proper degree. That's how they got there. They ran out of money, ran out of time, picked the wrong team, various things, right? So there's the investment, and then kind of the leap I just introduced really was the choice of who you're working with to complete it. So part of feasibility is not only the capacity of the client, but the capacity of the service providers. Those things have to come together to get the project started on the right foot. Because if they're not, can you start a project without assessing feasibility? People do it all the time, especially DIYers, because they say, well, I have, this amount of money, it can get me started. I have this amount of time on the weekends, I'm just going to start. And so we've seen shows like, I Wrecked My House. It's a great show because it shows where things just spiraled out of control quickly because feasibility was not in their heads. The after photo, so in their imagination is what was there. I have found that my successful projects, they have a proper assessment of feasibility as a common thread.
I love that. I'm all about feasibility. You know that. I mean, even though if it's not a word that I probably use as often, it's so true. It's really saying, what are the resources available and how can we best use them? Right. And it's looking at timing, it's looking at the calendar, it's looking at so many things. I know we are in the next phase of our renovation this year where we're redoing our family space. Last year was the bathroom, the dining room, all the floors, and the kitchen. This year is the family room that's kind of sitting in the middle of all of it. And, we've got our budgets that I went in and budgeted every single thing that like down to new pot holders because I was like, I'm not putting my grand pot holders in my brand new kitchen. They got to go.
Yes,
But
amazing.
right. But down to that, my husband's like, really, really, you put hot pot? I'm like, I'm paying for pot holders. They need to be on there. All new drawer organizers, all the things that we do. But then there's a feasibility of a budget, which we have. But then there's the feasibility of the timing and who's going to do what and how they're going to do it. Like we put a stop to things between, Thanksgiving and Christmas. I needed to put up a tree. So we had some things that were half done. Everything went to a stop, got put away. We celebrated the holidays and then we started back again. And so, even thinking of feasibility with what's happening in your life, what has to be done. Last year, our feasibility is we're out of pocket from May until the middle of August. We can't make any decisions. All decisions must be made prior to this, and then we'll sit with them. And so I think, a lot of times people don't think that way. We were talking to a couple the other day that were telling us about some friends that they have that, started a project, had things delivered to their home, and they don't even know the pricing of how all this is going to work out. They just thought, I've got a little bit left and it needs to be done. Let's just go. And even when you're working with a professional, I think not having the conversation. Talk to me a minute about, I think you've seen this. Why are some people or some situations creating fear in us to have a feasibility discussion? Because I've had feasibility with discussions with people that called me for coaching, and I had to say to them, the timing's not right. This is not the most feasible time. Like you don't have the time to put into it, or, we Yeah, you got the money and yeah, you have the need, but if you can't do the work, we need to put it off another month, right? So why are we sometimes afraid to even have the feasibility discussion up front? Because if we all know that it's necessary and we all know that not doing it and doing it well is going to usually lead to some type of trouble, why don't we do it?
That is an excellent question, Michelle. Like, out of all the things I've asked myself and asked clients, I have not thought of that one. But as you're talking and I'm getting ready to respond, various things come to mind. Interestingly, I was reading an article the other day that talked about how the way our brains are wired, the pleasure of experiencing something now often overrides the pain that will come later, our awareness of the pain that will come later.
Mm-hmm.
And so, even though we may be aware of the pain, the pleasure that we want of doing something we want now just overrides it. And
Kind of that
so,
shiny object
feasibility,
syndrome that we hear about, right?
mhm. Yes, shiny object syndrome. And the idea that the feasibility is going to be this almost like the parent coming in and saying playtime is over. We don't want to face that. I don't want to think about that. That's the first
That's
impulse we may
later.
think, oh, that's later. I don't want to think about that. I know we can start it now. Um, and we just go. We just go with it because now is what's driving us. It's what's got our attention. I'm not a science major or professional or a health professional, but I would imagine that if we were able to put one of those, some of those, I guess they're diodes or whatever, looks at brainwave patterns when we're having a discussion about our project, I'm willing to say that our brains probably light up
Right.
when we're talking about the result.
The excitement,
And
right? You can
the
see the
excitement.
excitement centers.
Mhm.
Yes.
But as soon as someone says those words like budget and all of that, I think the activity just quiets down. It might even shut down for some of us.
That's
And
right.
two, I think this is something that I've heard that everybody has issues that they've had with money.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they cause so much anxiety and stress that even just discussing something around having enough money or how much things will cost causes us to have so much anxiety sometimes
Mm-hmm.
that we just don't want to touch it either. So we don't consciously make these decisions. It's subconscious a lot of the times, but the way we approach the project says it all. And when we don't want to do address the feasibility, I think it's rooted in some of those things. And I have a good example for you too of when this happened the other day.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
So I had a discovery call with a couple. Not sounded very pleasant, nice. They were in another state, wanted to had already bought land here in Georgia, and wanted to get drawings done of their concept for this new build. The wife said, "Well, I've already coned different stock plans. I've not seen anything that's really exactly what I want, but I have some ideas and I would like to have them drawn." I thought I was doing an amazing thing, Michelle, by saying, "Well, yes, we can address that, but first let me help you understand the feasibility of your project." And I might have used the word feasibility, or I might have said something like, "Let's understand what are some good steps to consider before we get to the drawings."
Mm-hmm.
I started talking to her about building cost, what we're seeing in this market, particularly because she's out of state,
Right.
and what I think her project will cost. It did not matter what I said, Michelle. She kept cutting me off to ask me, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I hear that, but can you do the drawing?
So
Can
she
you do
was so
that?"
focused on the drawing. She wasn't focused on, because the thing is, to your point,
Yeah.
which is where I'm assuming you were trying to lead her, is we can draw anything you want to draw, but we would like to draw something that is feasible for your bank account to build.
Yes.
So if we draw something that ends up at 6 million and you got 300,000, there's a
Oh,
disconnect. So we need more information and we need to fully understand before we go down this rabbit hole, right?
right, right. Because I don't want because I didn't try to do this on the front end and we work together and then you become disenchanted, disappointed, all those dis words.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want to be associated with that part of your experience in life. I want this to be a win. I don't like starting what we can't finish. And in fact, I recently rebranded my company as the Masters of Done. That is what we are. We're going to put everything in place to help us get this thing done.
I love that. It's funny you say I don't want to be part of I don't want to be involved when they realize that the feasibility is it's not feasible, right?
Exactly.
And the truth is we all might run into that on a project. It's just the earlier we know it so that we can make an informed decision.
There you go.
Because right, another decision could lead to that infeasibility.
Still.
Right. So they're all kind of connected. I know when I was doing custom window treatments, people did not understand the cost of custom window treatments. I mean, they're not cheap. They just aren't. And they would call and they would ask, and I would start giving them information. I'd be more than happy to come to your home and measure and show you fabrics and design a window treatment. You need to know that the cost is approximately X amount for this width and this length. Is that within the range of what you're willing to spend and talk about? And if they said no, it was easier to end the conversation and say, that's okay. There was nothing worse. I mean, it made my stomach hurt to go into a home and lay out the possibilities, like create the dream with them, walk the dream with them, right? Design the dream in front of them with word pictures and color, draw it out on paper, and then give them a price and then say they couldn't do it. I didn't care if they paid me to come out to do all that. It was still miserable. It's still just, you're leaving with a yuck feeling. And so yuck for them and yuck for me. And how do they tell me they can't afford it? And then how do I say, it was not good. And so like you, I learned to move the conversation and not be afraid of the conversation, to have it quickly and to have it early. I know even with my son and his wife, they just got married. This is their first renovation that they're doing together. And both of them come from families where we're very organized, very budget oriented, very lay it all out. And they've built their spreadsheets and they've got their detail. They know the feasibility. They are ready for it before they start it. And they feel so much more peace than others that get halfway in and then realize they either don't have the funds to complete it, or they've got to now start making choices, or I didn't know it was going to cost that. Like, none of those are great outcomes. I can imagine that with you having the ability from an architectural standpoint and from that interior standpoint, it really does give you, I'm going to say, a depth of understanding the feasibility, not just from what can we put into the home to make it beautiful, but structurally what needs to happen and what are the current cost, or even the rising cost. I know I worked with a home builder a couple of years ago, right as the costs were starting to go up. And I mean, we were having to lock people in as fast as we could and then get bids that weren't going to change, because every day it seemed like things were climbing. And
Out of control.
it got out of control. And then houses that were, 250 a square foot to build were now 315 a square foot to build. Like, we were way outside the limit, and people were like chopping garages off and all kinds of things to stay within budget. The feasibility just started coming in like more than ever. What is your special power when it comes to that, having the architectural and the interiors?
Well, you can appreciate this play on words with your system metric. I have a metric.
I like it.
Metric, right? So I try to get this cost per square foot metric that's pretty within a range of success. Because
Right.
you're right, things fluctuate. It can even fluctuate from builder to builder.
Yes.
And then they don't know yet what level of material they want. Some of that is not really decided until much later in the process. But I start somewhere
Mm-hmm.
and I say, okay, for what this size home, we're at least 225 a square foot for this basic envelope with basic finish level. And then I get the calculator going. And what really got me into doing that, Michele, was taking a page from the contractor's book. Now, when they estimate a job down to the nail and screw, they have a costing book, they have spreadsheets, it's very systematic.
Yes.
However, even they themselves know an idea. though, a general number that they give. Some of the ones that are easiest to work with from a design standpoint have kind of given me that over the years. And it really ended up educating me. I said, oh, I remember they told me that right now we're running, so to speak, at 225 to 250. I bring that knowledge right to the calls I have. And that's really what I would say is what we want to do as designers, because let's just think about it from the standpoint of the conversation in the client's head, the conversation any of us have in our heads when we want something. We just want the something. We don't really care what the process is. And so, since that's the case, yes, we're designers, but we are facilitators more than we are designers. Design just happens to be our modality.
It's a very small part of the whole thing in general. After that, it's facilitation.
Okay, so
Yeah.
the design skill that we have makes it what it is. It's what gives us the success of the goal. The doing of it, though, has, like you say, all of these other components that informs that outcome. As a service to our industry, our clients, it really is good for us to know more than just our craft. We want to be able to keep an eye on and a measure of influence on all the parameters. And we have the information at our disposal because we work with the builders. Sometimes we may even have to work with a realtor if we're trying to help our client transition from one home to the next. I think about some of the HGTV shows that are focused on that process.
Right.
We can learn from that. There are indicators and metrics that we can pull into our discovery call or consultation process that we want to introduce early, way before we get into, what color are the walls. We do everybody a service when we do that. And really, quite frankly, we can charge more. Why? We're bringing tremendous value. We're doing the work of several consultants at that point. And so our fee should reflect that.
I love that. Tell us a time, tell us about a time where you have gone through like a feasibility study conversation where you have shared that with a client and it resulted in like an amazing dream project. Have you had one like that?
Yes, so I did a signature build with a contractor. It was a husband and wife team, and they did this big, beautiful home with a guest house, 9,000 plus square feet of space. And what was neat about our process is from the very beginning, we would do weekly calls where we would talk strategy. Before one found piece of the concrete was laid, we were
Yeah.
already addressing how do we situate this home on the land? How do we choose systems? How do we choose finishes, look and feel, with the end goal of this being a signature build for your brand?
Mm,
So took the result and we wound the process way back to the elements that could bring it together.
yeah.
And that was the one project that I was able to participate from beginning to end. I ended up working with them to realize so much of what we talked about. And what was nice is that because we had a rhythm of communication from the beginning, it made changes very easy to talk through and implement as well.
Because
You
you'd
said it
already
earlier.
opened up that process. So then it was just another thing to talk about in the process. It wasn't such an emotional, oh my gosh, now we have to have a conversation. The conversations were so ongoing. It was just something that came up in the last week or since the last time we spoke, and now let's work through it.
Yeah. So what it ended up meaning is that we never had real problems because we always had real solutions.
Well, it makes me think, Robyn, that it felt like you were on the same team. I think often when we're going into this, we see ourselves as us here and the clients here. So we're kind of at odds. From what you described, it sounds like you and the client were on the same side and the build was over here, and the two of you, or the group of you, right, were working together to get to that end result versus
Yes.
against each other. I look at it as you were beside each other at the table, not across each other from each other at the table.
Very nice. Yes, it felt
Yeah.
that way. And part of the success they were great listeners. They were very receptive, and I was very yielding. Because you talked about that, the emotion of it. I think sometimes that gets heightened when we are overly committed to an aspect of the project that we just feel if we don't do it this way, it's not going to be what we thought. I have found that there's always more than one way to have a beautiful, appropriate outcome that gets capture the essence of what you're trying to create. And that's one thing that they commended me on quite a bit. My willingness to come in strong evidence, strong support for an approach or an idea. But then when they wanted to do something else, just as easily as I came in strong, I was able to just relax and yield and say, that's nice too, and just moving
Right.
right past it. They found that very refreshing because that was one of the things that I think they were afraid of. Like, if we integrate a designer this deeply into our process, will we be at odds?
And will it end up looking more like you or more like their signature brand?
Yes,
And
that's right.
I think when we go into a conversation like this, at least the way that it's been more successful for me is to understand the feasibility of the project. I had mentioned on a podcast, I had a professor in college one time tell me that I had the wonderful ability to assimilate and dissimilate. Now, as a 21-year-old, I was like, I'm not real sure what all that means in my life. But it struck me because his comment was most people tend to assimilate or to dissimilate, but to be able to go from the beginning to the end and then from the end to the beginning, that's like a skill because you can see it, you can see the whole, and then you can see the pieces and you can see back and forth of how they go together. And that's how my brain works. Like, I met with a client this morning that was telling me that they had, a product that looked like this, and they had a product that looked like this, and what happened when the one-off came in. And I started saying, well, all of those are just building blocks. Isn't the one-off 2 pieces of this one and 1 piece of that one? Yeah, well, then you already know how to do it. But they weren't able, just initially, they saw those as completed things, not as individualized pieces that could be pulled from, right? And that's when I do financials, that's why I do top down and bottom up. Tell me what the company's expected to do. Now tell me what you need from the company. And let's find the halfway point where they both intersect so that the company is made whole, but the owner is made whole. How do we find that kind of like that nexus right there? Because that's where we want to play, right? That's what feasibility is. Because on if you think about it from a financial perspective, you can tell me all day that you want to make $1 million and you want to make $500,000 as the owner. But if you're telling me you got 3 hours a week to work, that's not feasible with this particular plan. So we're looking at hours, we're looking at pricing, we're looking at investment in the company, we're looking at what the company needs to do and how much does it cost to run the company, right? The exact same conversation that you're having with a client around the budget. What is the time? How much do we have to put into it? What will the look be? Just like you're saying, there's more than one way. When I tell my clients, I'm like, I'm not giving you a template. I am not going to give you what's worked for every other. What works for you? What do you want to do? What is your signature business? Let me help you build that. There's certainly principles. There's certainly templates and checklists, but our businesses are not like one size fits all. It can't be, let's just go get it. You can't go into a project and go, here's one size fits all. Here's a plan, build it. We're done. We're out of there. That's just like, it's not the way that it works. And so you being able to have that conversation with them, let's take the pieces. Here's the picture. Here's the picture on the puzzle box. Now we got to put the puzzle together. How do we put the puzzle together? Who's putting together the edges? Missing a corner. Like, you can start to make sure that we have the boundary put together to then go build the puzzle, right?
Very nice. Mm-hmm.
And I love that when you are so yielding and you are curious, right? As we started the podcast with, and you're open, because see, now you're a team member. You're not fighting for Robyn's way and Robyn's vision. You're now a team member that says, how do we make this have this look? There's more than one way to achieve that. I bet so that when you really put your foot down and maybe felt yourself more unyielding, it was highly respected because you had yielded in so many other areas that if they truly trusted you, the moment that you don't yield, they're like, okay, Robyn's digging in. We should probably listen to this one. Now it's our turn to yield to her. Is that the experience that you had there?
It certainly is. It's so funny too, because I could sense when it was shifting. Like I remember we were doing some last installation of the accessories and artwork, and they gave me a lot of latitude with how to position things. We got to this, there were two walls in particular that we were doing a layer that I think is very important to bring in organic elements. So it's so funny how certain language I would use, like you picked up on, I didn't know how much I had interwoven feasibility into my answers. Well, I kept talking about, organics, and we need round shapes. I want you to do a ratio of rectilinear to round. So we were doing I was positioning the round elements. And I think the wife, she had a certain way that she's used to putting these particular types of circles. It was like 4 of them, they were different sizes. But I had this way I did it, and I positioned them. And she said, "So why?" She just asked, "So why are you doing that?" I said, "Well, just like in nature, there's the unexpected, and you want to create what I call visual tension. It's much more interesting when there's some visual tension between the elements versus them being in like a regular pattern that you anticipate." And she looked at me and she said, "Okay."
Right, because you knew, like you had earned her trust by that point, that you were in it for the same outcome. I think this is what's so important with feasibility.
Mhm.
Now that I'm thinking about it, I love this conversation so much, Robyn. I think that in feasibility, sometimes people again have the idea that they're fighting against you to get something done, right?
Yes.
Even though it's not you, it's what you're bringing up, the budget, the timeline. You're the representation of those things. And they feel like sometimes those things are against them. They feel that negative energy against the timeline, against the builder, against whatever it is in that particular moment. The shift is that we are on a team together, and we are working through the challenges that come with the money, the challenges that come with the timeline. If we can just mentally position ourselves beside them, linking arms with them to work through the project, I think that can so shift. I know that's the thing that my clients say when we work together. They're like, I mean, we're sharing a lot of private details, right, about the inner workings of their company. And one of the things they always say is, "I don't feel judged. I feel like you are standing beside me, helping me fight the battle that I have in front of me, versus I'm having to answer to you for something." That's not what this is, right? And I
That's
see
very
your
true.
relationship with the client, from what you're describing, when you can get that ideal client that allows you to link arms with them to make the vision their reality, but in a
Right.
better way than they could do themselves, which is why
Mhm.
they call you for all that expertise. It shifts that uncomfortableness of the conversation to make it natural.
It does. It really does. And that's what I was attempting to do with this call with my couple out of town. I really wanted them to see that I'm coming in as your ally, your facilitator of this vision coming together. And I wanted them to understand. So, one thing they mentioned was that, "Oh, we've already talked with several contractors," as if to say, "We've already done this part." I said, "Well, let me help you understand why I do this. True, you've done this part and you've sought the counsel of builders. But unfortunately, sometimes the builder, in an effort to get a project started, will just give you something that is not unrealistic, but they just want to start. They're not necessarily invested in you finishing, because by the time you realize that you can't finish, they have been paid handsomely."
That's right.
And I ended up doing that not on the call itself, but in a follow-up email, as I was just attempting to give them some ideas of how the home could look. And that, because one reason why I'm doing all of this too is that I like to give a demonstration of value before they even start paying our company.
That's right.
I still have not heard back from them, Michelle.
I was going to ask you.
But so yeah, so I knew that was your next question. I still have not heard back from them. But I tell you, this happens all the time. I will think a person has gone away. I will take them. I have a way I system, all of us, I'm sure, as professionals have systems and how we organize and do our CRM. I will have them over in a whole archive folder, and they'll resurface. It'll
Right.
be
In
so
some
funny.
capacity. I think sometimes it's about you're educating them and they're going so fast, right? That sometimes they don't want to be educated until they have to be.
Yes. And that's where the resurfacing happens.
That's
As a
right.
part of the education process, they begin to see that, oh, wait a minute. I keep running up against the same stoppers, the same obstacles, the things I didn't want to listen to, I have to now because they keep happening. And it's not because Robyn said it, and it's not because this person, it must be because it's true, because it
Yes.
keeps happening. And then I love that they end up returning to me because it helps me to understand that, yes, I must have been successful in conveying my personal investment in their success and them seeing me as that team member who is going to remain loyal to their interest and help them get to the completion, that done, being that master of done for them.
I love that, master of done. You know, it's interesting. I think you made the comment, people just want to get started. They're just so excited about the project. The endorphins are pumping. They're ready to get going. They finally made that decision. And really, as a design professional, the job is to help them understand the true scope of the project. And I know I see all the time online, I've been guilty of it when I was first starting out myself, not maybe having a full understanding of all that it was going to take. I think we've all been there in our early days. And we are equally as excited to get started with that project. And so we take it on without maybe talking about pricing the way we need to, without talking about how we're going to be paid. Then we don't know how to ask to be paid, or we don't know how to send them a bill for something or how to stand behind it. We don't even know how to tell them that it's going to be 12 weeks to get that in. And now they don't know, you know what I'm saying? We haven't done enough of our own homework, or we don't have the experience, which you can't fast track. And so we are equally as excited to just go without our own feasibility. So I love that you share how it's not just your feasibility that you've looked into for the areas that you own, but kind of understanding how the feasibility of those other what would I say, ancillary providers, right? Like the builder and the plumber and all the other things, kind of knowing what their pricing looks like, so that when you're having a conversation, you can say, we're within the boundaries, right? Like we're within the limits of where we could move left or right on this project. It's just so important to be watching all those different things. It's like, I know if somebody comes to me and they're like, I'm using all my money to talk to you. And I'm like, but you got to hire somebody. Like, it's the same
Yes.
thing as saying, I'm going to put all my money into the build, but you got to have furniture. Like, there is more here than, I told somebody yesterday, no offense to Ashley, so nobody come after me, like no bad moments here, but there's a home right outside, almost across the street from my house, $1 million home. And they backed up an Ashley truck to it to put furniture in it. And I gasped. And my husband's like, what is wrong with you? And I said, those people are house poor. They're house build poor. They either don't understand quality or they're house poor, because it is rare that you would go buy a truck full of Ashley furniture to put into $1 million home. In our area at the time, it wasn't, before all the inflation pieces hit, it didn't make sense. And I think that's where people don't understand how far everything, the feasibility of the whole project, to your point, is done.
Right. And it's why I built a recent iteration of my investment guide around an entire process, from the build to interiors for at least 5 main rooms, and even exterior on the front and sides of the home that are going to be seen from the street.
That's
And
right.
I came up with a number. If you do not have $522,000 to build your 2,000 square foot home, you want to reevaluate your investment. And in my guide, I broke down all those numbers, how we calculated them, what are they for, down to the furniture, to just paint that picture that if you don't have this to spend, yes, you're going to have something, but it's not going to be that HGTV version that you
That's
think
right.
you're going to get. And so It's still interesting. I still don't know to this day if it's repelling or drawing people to Collins, because you know how it is with metrics and analytics. As a business owner, you try to keep some gauge on those things. What I feel that it is doing for the ones who do call, it is having success in them calling as an educated person. One great discovery call I had, I loved that the homeowner kept referring to the document. He said, "Now I remember from the document you said this." And I said, "Yes."
Then it
It's doing
landed.
exactly what I need.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and it resonated with them. So that showed me that they are teachable, they are reasonable, they are open. There are all these traits that
They're
are
paying
part of the
attention.
formula. Paying attention, and they part of the formula of a
Mm.
successful client designer relationship is there. And the only reason we haven't started working together, the husband's a pilot for, you know, he's a flies the huge jets all over the world, and hey, they have children, and the children got sick. You know, I think I don't know if they had COVID, but they had something. So they've had a lot of things that have just slowed them down on really locking in on this process. But soon we are supposed to have our initial in-person working consultation to just start unpacking some of the things that I've already started talking to them about in terms of feasibility. So I'm excited. I think that we have a great set of ingredients for success should we go the distance with the project.
I love it. I love it. Robyn, this has been such a fun conversation, just really dialing into it's about being clear. And you know, there's this saying that clear is kind. And I think that what you're doing with your clients when you're giving them that information, clear is kind. And that's what you're being. I think it's also interesting that not all clients want the information. That's telling, right? To your point. So if a client, if you're educating them and telling, and that I don't want it, don't care, don't care, don't care, that should be a red flag for your way of working. Because if they don't care and won't engage in a joint conversation at the beginning to kind of set the stage and clear up the scope of work, I can promise you that's going to be one that's fuzzy and difficult all the way through. You didn't tell me this. Well, I didn't know that. I didn't understand this.
Yes.
Versus the ones that feel more clear and on the same page at the very, very beginning.
Yes, Michelle. I had a breakup, so to speak, last week with a client. Thankfully, we were at a point of departure that made sense because I had linked them with a great builder that I was familiar with, had worked with, and they also have an integrated project management process. And part of why it ended the way it did is because I did not pay attention to my early indicators that they were not doing just what you said just then from the front end, wanting to have the full feasibility and scope conversation. That should have been my time to decide that I'm not going to try to do this project with them.
Right.
But I had this mentality at the time that it's 50-50. Maybe what my sensors are saying are 50% wrong. Well, they were 100% correct.
Isn't that the case that they usually are, right? It's kind of,
Right.
it's the Maya Angelou, when people show you who they are, believe them.
Believe it. Why are
Believe
you
it.
second guessing? You know
Right.
this. Come on. But anyway, they paid on time. That was great. It got us through the end of the year, our slowest time. But nevertheless, a lot of good success ahead of us with feasibility. And one thing I will say to your listeners in terms of us all being in the design boat, the same way I love to collaborate with clients, I love collaborating with other designers. Because part of feasibility for me as a business owner is it's not always feasible for me to do every aspect of the project.
That's
And so
right.
although we're in interiors, we do not do full service interior design. So guess what I like to do? I like to recommend or collaborate with those firms that do.
That's beautiful. That's wonderful. And then you get to spread the love and spread the wealth, but
That's
you're
it.
also working with bringing another person in on the same side of the table
There
to
you go.
get the project to the end. I love that. It's really about being collaborative, and that's the position that you're sitting in.
Yes,
Well,
ma'am.
Robyn, tell people where they can find you. Where are you hanging out online in the web world?
Yes, so primarily we love it when you visit our site, robynstudios.com. My name is spelled with a Y like yellow, so it's ROBYN studios.com. There is the nucleus of everything because our social links are there, Free resources are there. In fact, we just launched an excellent download. It's 104 kitchens that are already done, so to speak. A great platform for designers to start the conversation with their homeowners. What's neat about it, though, is there's some built-in shoppability to it, to fantastic brands. And so that's a great leveraging tool for designers, and that they don't have to go into conversation starting from scratch, even though it will end up being a custom build.
Oh, that is so amazing. Well, Robyn, thank you so much for reaching out and letting me know what you thought about the podcast. Thank you so much for
Certainly,
being
Michele.
such a delightful conversationer. You're so good at it. And this has just been, this lights me up when we get to have conversations like this. So I appreciate you reaching out.
Thank you so much. I feel the same way.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
You too.
Robyn, thank you so much for sharing with us about feasibility. It really is vital to the completion of an amazing project. And maybe those of you listening are considering the feasibility of your own company, wondering where's the intersection between your strategic plan, your financial plan, how are you going to get things done? How are you going to pay yourself and meet the same needs that the company might have for bonuses or new expenditures or anything like that? We would love to work with you in our CFO to Go program, where we help you create the picture, if you will, on the puzzle box for what you want your company to do. And then we help you put in those outer edges to create a framework so that you can then fill in the inside. You can find out more about this offer by going to scarletthreadconsulting.com and looking at the CFO to Go tab. And as always, always plan to be profitable, because profit doesn't happen by accident. Profit is a Choice is proud to be part of the designnetwork.org, where you can discover more design media reaching creative listeners. Thanks for listening, and stay creative and business minded.